Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show with your host, David Lawrence.
Welcome to today's edition of the Vine Resources Podcast Show. I'm delighted to say we've got a fantastic guest today, Jeff Stern. Jeff is the CTO of a company called TruMedia Networks, based over in Boston in the US. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me.
No, glad to be here.
Jeff, I'd love to share with our listeners a little bit about the company, your background, and what you do over at TruMedia Networks, please.
Sure. So the company does sports research software. So what that kind of means is it's the software that helps teams or media properties like an ESPN answer a variety of questions about what's going on in the game and connect it to video to back up some of that kind of analytics data that goes into it. So that's used in a baseball example for advanced scouting. If you want to know the opposing batters that you're going to face, whether curveballs that are low and away have worked better than fastballs up and in, visualizing that through heat maps, through numbers, through video. So we don't do the analytics research. What we do is we provide the tools that allow the teams and the media properties to self-service that. So it's really kind of business intelligence software, almost kind of like Tableau, but really customized to the niche of the particular sports that we work in and fully connected to video.
Amazing. And I know you've got around about 15 people in the company. You work with clients on a global scale. Obviously, baseball, American football are your top sports, I imagine. Soccer and cricket as well. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We actually probably do a similar amount of business in soccer to American football. Baseball is our largest business, and then cricket is emerging for us.
And this has obviously been an area that sports teams and been looking at for a long time. What makes your visualization different or better for them, and how does it really give them that competitive advantage?
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to allow users that may not have a traditional technology background, but are sort of fluent in the kind of common concepts of data and sample size and those kind of things, be able to self-service a lot of the questions. So the types of users that we might have in a baseball team will actually, in many cases, be former minor league players or something that are now working and supporting the teams. But what you'll see is a lot of them are very fluent in the ideas of sample size and other good statistical practices, but they're not the people that are going to write a script in R or execute SQL queries or deep dive necessarily into Excel. But when they can get the information, they know what to do, and they can bring a background of real sports firsthand experience to those questions. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for as broad an audience as possible to get to video and to get to analytics information, but without needing to know how to sort of do the underlying SQL and other work themselves.
Now, I know you've been, you're I believe, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I know you're a software engineer by kind of trade, but obviously you've got a passion for sports. What got you into this industry? Because I know you've been with the business for over nearly 10 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in 2008, and even a little bit before this, they were experimenting. But in 2008, Major League Baseball started publishing what they called the Pitch FX data set. They worked with a company called Sport Vision at the time. They put cameras in all 30 Major League Baseball venues, and they were capturing the full three-dimensional pitch trajectory of every pitch. So they had, roughly where it was released by the pitcher, where it was crossing the plate, but also the full arc that it was taking to get there. They were able to infer certain amounts of spin and break on the ball. But for the most part, all they were doing with that was they created this app that allowed you, if you couldn't watch the video of the game, to kind of see these, little arced lines describing what had happened in the last at bat. And they published all of this data. It was all out there for a ton of people to explore, but they didn't aggregate any of it. They didn't provide any tools to, do things like determine, where does Mariano Rivera, who had a very strong trend at the time when he was pitching for the Yankees, throw with one strike versus with two strikes, and sort of look at these aggregated or more visualization appropriate questions. And I just kind of saw the data and started playing with it. And then, kind of built out a little heat mapping prototype in my spare time, connected with Rafe, who's our CEO, who I had known. He was working at Fenway Sports Group, when my prior job, I had kind of come to interact with him. And we just ended up finding this market with a couple of baseball teams and then ESPN, and it sort of spiraled from a side project business to an actual full-time business between like 2010 and 11.
Wow, with lots, I'm sure there's lots of insights you can give us on that journey as well. But jobs bring us up to present day. What does a typical day in the business look like for you as the CTO?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, we're still a small company. It's 15 people, and actually about 4 of them are kind of working on a separate project related to exploring some sports betting. So it's really about 11 people on that core business. So at this point, I still code actively. I probably spend about 50% of my time still actually writing code. But beyond that, I mean, in a business this size, everybody's wearing a bunch of hats, right? So it could be product management, it could be team management, it could be business development, contact with a lot of customers. It goes through all of those things. Even before, COVID sort of changed everything, we were always a remote company. So my day was always at home and communicating with everybody else that's working with us. But yeah, just a mix of things.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, it's always good that you're already set up and ready to go in this environment. Jeff, who perhaps has influenced you in your life, in your career so far, and how have they helped shape your career?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit cliche, but I think probably my dad would be the person that had the largest influence. So, I kind of wanted to be a little bit different. So, I was always very technical into math and science. He was in software. And so when I went to college, I started by majoring in electrical engineering, but quickly realized after, doing lab soldering circuits to get it to be able to add very small numbers that was not actually for me. And the abstraction that software provided was a much better fit for what I wanted to do. And so I ended up following more closely and, maybe feel a little guilty about the bit of nepotism here, but I actually got an internship at Cisco Systems, which is where he was working at the time. He was director of a group of about 70 people or something. So in addition to kind of getting my first work experience, I actually got to see him lead this, fairly large group of people, which was kind of cool.
Fantastic. And look, I know you said earlier that your company's very well versed working remotely because that's how you've had it. But perhaps a slightly different question to you then, but I'm curious how you keep a remote workforce engaged. What are the secrets that you've learned over the years?
So, I mean, I think we benefit from working in sports, that I think that's probably easier for us than potentially a lot of other companies. I mean, one of the things that we try and do in the hiring process is make sure that we hire people that explicitly want to work in sports. And so, I think the biggest thing to keeping people engaged for us is to make sure that we're mostly living up to their original expectations about what working in sports means. And we tend to be pretty engaging about allowing people to participate in the the product management process, as well as the customer interactions. So almost everybody has been on email chains with, people actually working for a baseball team or for ESPN or a football team or something like that, as well as also getting to, as they're building the product, they're trying it out and they're putting themselves in the shoes of the user, and they're actually trying to kind of solve something more than just very explicitly following a functional spec. And I think in picking people that want to work in this domain and then allowing them to have some more autonomy than might be traditional, that's been pretty successful for us.
Okay, post-COVID or in COVID, what do you think's the biggest challenge facing business leaders today?
Well, certainly for us, COVID is the biggest challenge. We operate as a SaaS business. Where our job is not so much to produce game data, but to keep a website up that helps you analyze it. So we're a little bit more insulated, perhaps, than the average company working in sports. But at the same time, our customers are struggling deeply with this, right? In as much as, their revenue is from playing games, it's not even clear. So our biggest business is baseball. It hasn't even been announced yet whether that will resume in 2020 at all. So, the biggest challenge for us is, we're a small business that needs to keep the revenue flowing to keep everybody paid and all of that. but at the same time trying to be kind of compassionate and a cooperative partner to our customers that are also struggling potentially even more than us with this, and just trying to find a way where, 2020 is going to be a tough year no matter what, but find a way where, from a business perspective, our customer base, our bookings, our pipeline are larger than they were going into 2020, even if 2020 wasn't great.
Do you see some of those sports coming back online behind closed doors, but maybe with bigger, maybe free-to-air channels for viewership, or some kind of change in that happening in the short term?
I mean, I could speculate like anybody else. I don't actually have any inside information. I mean, it's really hard for me to imagine 50,000 people together sharing mustard dispensers and whatever anytime before there's a vaccine. So I think the plans have to be without fans at this point. And then it's a matter of renegotiating player contracts and probably figuring out logistics. Baseball's talked about Arizona because there's a whole bunch of venues that can be together there, so they don't have to travel to all these different hotels and become super spreaders and all of that. But then even for baseball, actually, a lot of our work is minor leagues as well. And so, I mean, it's really tough to imagine. So I would imagine with a renegotiated player contract, baseball can be profitable with TV only. But I don't see how the minor leagues can be, right? So that's, going to be tough. And then, football is, American football is, clearly the biggest money sport in America. So I have to imagine they'll find a way to do it. But it's hard for me to imagine that having fans.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
So again, this one would probably go back to my dad, and I don't know that it came from him, but he's certainly the person that related to me, which is that 90% of managing is hiring the right people in the first place. Once you've got the wrong person, there's only so much you can do, and so we've tried to live by that.
It's very sound advice from you there. What's exciting you? Again, I know there's lots of challenges, but tell me about what's really exciting you in your industry right now, and for the year ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess this year is a little different, but I'd say in general, what I find really attractive about, the industry we're in, but, our company in particular, is the emergence of these new data sources. We might be the only company really that has access to this player tracking data where, they've got, whether it's cameras or chips in the NFL, and they're tracking, 10 or 25 times a second exactly where the ball is, where every player is, and putting all that together. And we have that data for baseball, for soccer, for American football, and just, seeing what that means and how you can understand the nature of, what adds skill to a given player, right? Like a wide receiver in football is adding skill by getting open. They're adding skill by being in sync with the quarterback as the, pass is being released. They're adding skill by catching a pass even when they're not very open, by getting more yards after the catch. And you're actually starting to be able to dissect and analyze those things, not anecdotally, but with data.
That's amazing. It's amazing. What are you doing? And again, it might be during this period, particularly much more, but what do you do to help your employees improve their well-being?
I mean, because we were already remote, there's not a huge change for us, and we've been pretty fortunate. Nobody's gotten sick, but we've always been extremely flexible. And, we told people up front we're going to be even more flexible. Periodically, a couple times a week, I'm going off and teaching a math class. We're just, very flexible about timing, and we were already well set up for remote. So, as long as everybody's getting what they need done, or certainly if anybody has any extenuating circumstance, if somebody in their house gets sick and all those kind of things, we'll adapt to that as well. But just trying to be really flexible with time.
Is there perhaps a story from your childhood that influenced your work ethic in later life that you could share?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything good for this one. I guess I've always been more of the work smarter, not harder kind of balance there. And I think to some extent our product embodies that, in that, our main selling point to a lot of these teams, we try and show new things we can do, But honestly, how we get in with them is showing them we can do the thing that they're already doing way faster, so they can then use their time elsewhere. And then hopefully we grow and we can show them new things as well. But it's really just being able to do things much quicker and more efficiently.
And clearly there's huge growth in this market. What do you think the industry is going to look like in 3 to 5 years' time, if you had your crystal ball, and how might that impact your business model?
Yeah, I mean, I think most likely the types of people that work at teams across all sports will start to sort of evolve in a similar way to baseball. And I mean, I think the really interesting thing that kind of happened in baseball is you had, a bunch of these traditional scouts in the teams. And then what you started to have was you had a bunch of data analysts that were really fluent in all of the data science aspects. But what's kind of happening is these groups are becoming less distinct from each other over time in baseball. You'll have a former college player, a minor league player, even major league player that's also looking at the gyrospin rates and how that correlates to next year's performance. And so I think data fluency is just becoming something that is kind of required. You're not going to see the hiring of any MLB team manager where he talks about how he just trusts his gut, right? Like people contextualize things and they have a lot of data, and now you want to use that to confirm your gut. And I mean, I think we're going to see, American football, soccer, and all the other sports following that trend, which will allow the insights that data can generate to be used much more widely when there's full buy-in.
What if you had your time again and were giving your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, Jeff, what would you say?
I guess maybe to be a bit more confident that the work I'm doing is both novel and valuable, and maybe to not think of this idea of business development as this black box that you should pay somebody else to do, and that it's really kind of common sense and just understanding the incentives and how those align and how they play off each other and how they'll play out, and to kind of get more involved with that earlier.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate jumping on the podcast today with us. If people want to find out more about the company, connect with you, what's the best way they can do that?
There's either, just a contact link right at the top of our website, as well as just emailing me at jeff@TruMediaNetworks.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. And again, I'll just say that if you go to TruMedia Networks, that's TRU MediaNetworks.com. You'll be able to find the link, find out more about Jeff and the company. And Jeff, thanks so much for joining me, and all the best over in Boston.
Thank you very much.
We really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you want to listen to more exclusive tips and life lessons from our guest, go to the resources page at vineresources.com.